Former Secretary of State Colin Powell made news yesterday when he accused his own party, while affirming that he's still a Republican, of racism and bigotry, saying the GOP lost the last two elections, presidential elections, because of a significant shift to the right and a racist strain within the party.
There's also a dark vein of intolerance in some parts of the party. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is they still sort of look down on minorities. How can I evidence that? When I see a former governor say that the president is shucking and jiving, that's a racial era slave term. When I see another former governor after the president's first debate where he didn't do very well, says that the president was lazy. He didn't say he was slow, he was tired, he didn't do well. He said he was lazy. Now, it may not mean anything to most Americans, but to those of us who are African Americans, the second word is shiftless, and then there's a third word that goes along with it. Birther, the whole birther movement. Why do senior Republican leaders tolerate this kind of discussion within the party?
Joining me now, Brad Blakeman, the former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush, and Marjorie Clifton, a Democratic strategist and CEO of Clifton Consulting. Brad, let me start with you on this because, you know, here's a guy who worked for the same president you worked for and starts the interview by saying he's still a Republican, but whoa, with friends like that within the Republican Party, who needs enemies? He was not kind on your party. Your thoughts on his accusations?
I reject it, and I say to Secretary Powell, if our party was like that, then why would you consistently call yourself a Republican? And if our party was like that, or you perceived it to be that way, what have you done to change it? Did you run for office? No. Were you a delegate at the convention? No. Did you speak at the convention? No. Did you try and influence the party platform if you thought it should be changed? The answer to all that is no. As a matter of fact, he supported Barack Obama in 2 elections. When is a Republican a Republican? I don't think the Secretary is a Republican he thinks he is. I think he's become an armchair general when it comes to the Republican Party, and I think it's easy to send accusations out, but I don't believe that there's any basis of fact to what he perceives to be a problem, an endemic problem within the Republican Party. I just reject it.
You know, Marjorie, you can go and find individual comments by anybody on either side if you want to make it. I mean, the examples he used, put apart the birtherism, because that's a whole entity unto itself, right? But those terms, you know, lazy, right. You know, that's a matter of perception and a matter of opinion. But let's just say all those remarks are super racist. You know, you can do that for either side and then try to tar the whole party with it.
Well, and I think there's a danger in saying that he's not a Republican and using a purity test. And actually, I think what he's doing, I think he genuinely wants to improve things for the Republican Party, and I think that his taking a stand on this issue is his way of doing that. I mean, you do look at the facts, only 6% of African Americans are registered as Republicans, and as we saw in the elections, there is a lot of work to do with Latinos, and we saw a shift since the Bush administration where 44 to 45% of voters were Latino, or sorry, the Latino population were voting for President Bush, and since then there's been a large shift. So I think that what he's speaking to is a genuine desire to see a shift and an opening and a broadening of the tent for Republicans. And you have to look at his experience as well, and coming on the backs of the Golden Globes where Lincoln won a ton of awards. If you saw Lincoln, what struck me was what recent history, slavery, and segregation really is. I mean, Colin Powell, when he was a military officer, couldn't get a hotel room because he was a black man. So his sensitivities towards language like this is understandable in the same way as a woman, when someone says, I had to recently opt out of a trip to Afghanistan because my daughter was 2 weeks old, I thought, gosh, that hurt to hear, because opt out is a rough word for a woman, and for him as an African-American man, absolutely. And I think he's trying to do, I think he's thinking in the best interest of the party.
What your thoughts on that, Brad?
I don't at all. As a matter of fact, if you look at the policies of the Democrats, they've hurt minorities. Look at the unemployment rate among African Americans in our inner cities. It's double the national average. So when you're talking about policy versus rhetoric, the Republican Party has been, if anything, open. Look at the fantastic minorities we have, not only serving in government but supporting our party. People like Bobby Jindal and and the governor of New Mexico, Governor Martinez, and Senator Marco Rubio. We've got tremendous representation, and to say that some of these words that were taken out of context are somehow what the Republican credo is, what our platform is, we reject that. We reject the birthers. We reject anybody within our party who makes disparaging comments against anyone.
What about that, Marjorie? Because he says, why didn't Republican leaders speak out about, like, you know, there's so many comments you could point to on the Democratic side where people were out of line and Democratic leaders didn't speak out, like, you know.
Yeah, there's examples on both sides, but I think the whole point is not to reject, but to embrace and to listen. And I think what has to happen is a cultural shift within both parties, absolutely, but I think certainly within the Republican Party, when you look at the numbers, in terms of embracing more minorities at the grassroots level, not just at the leadership level.
Let me just jump in and ask you about that, because I want to ask you a follow-up on that, because there is a theory among some that it doesn't matter how embracing the Republicans are of the African-American voters, their policies are most likely not going to appeal to a large section of those voters today, tomorrow, 4 years from now.
Well, I think that absolutely culturally there's sometimes where people label themselves in one party or the other, and some of it is policy driven. But again, I think that's where some of the listening needs to happen, and on both parties' part, this swing to the extremes is not doing any favors in terms of getting meaningful legislation passed on a lot of fronts that are really necessary, like immigration reform, one of the key things that both parties are talking about. Both Republicans and Democrats understand how necessary that is. And retreating to our corners isn't going to do any favors.
Quick last word, Brad.
Look, as Republicans, we take no group for granted, and we should be reaching out to every group to be part of the Republican Party, because it's crazy to say that African Americans will not have an affinity to our party. They certainly do. And we're seeing that every day with the type of candidates we're fielding and the length and breadth we're going to encourage them to come into the Republican Party. Under the Obama policies, they're not doing any better today than they were 4 or 5 years ago.
And that's
language is
important. Good job, both of you.